Hello and welcome to another episode of So What Do You Actually Do? In today's episode, I got the chance to interview Brandon. Brandon graduated in bachelor's from VCU in urban planning. After that, he worked in urban planning as a project and operations supervisor in the City of Richmond Department of Public Works. In his role, Brandon is focused on granting mobility and access to all the citizens of Richmond. Please tune in this episode to learn about Brendan's job and what he does for the City of Richmond. Enjoy. Program and Operations Supervisor. What do you actually do?
So, because I came from a construction background, and this wasn't necessarily in my job description when I got the job, but I handle a lot of construction projects for our office. So things like pour concrete, schedule electrical work for it, do the site layouts and things of that nature. So my department is the Department of Public Works, but the office is the Office of Equitable Transit and Mobility. So with that, we work to make the transportation systems in the city of Richmond more equitable. So we do a lot of programs for low income, do a lot of programs connecting transportation services to places in the city that typically don't have it. I manage the e-scooters in the city of Richmond too, that everybody loves tripping over on the sidewalk. So for something like that, there wasn't a ton of scooters on the south side of the city, which has historically been maligned racially along economic lines as well. So I designed a program where whatever company permits scooters is permitted to override scooters in the city has to have 20% of their fleet on the south side of the city. So I
Wow.
wrote that legislation and got that legislation passed through the city council. So things like that I do as well.
Cool. So, can you please explain to me the process and the method of which you identified the need, created a process and workflow to tackle it, and then the execution?
Yeah, so this comes up through surveys and public engagement. So we do a ton of public engagement in this office. Sometimes what we typically like to do is go towards community events that are already happening, National Night Out. Sometimes there'll be church events and or community events and things of that nature. So we'll go to those events, we'll put up a table and say, hey, tell us about your transportation related needs. Where are you at that buses can't get to you? Are you a bike rider? How your kids getting to school? Are they safe walking to school? All sorts of questions we'll ask and we'll, write those down or we'll have like an informal survey or something of that nature. And then through that process, we realized that there are a ton of holes within the public transportation network. And we kind of started brainstorming on, how can we kind of fill these holes up without rerouting buses or adding more money to the GRTC budget because money for public transportation is obviously one of the tighter budgets in the government.
That piece of legislation that you've wrote, is that part of the job where you're needing to know how to create legislation, or is it something where you kind of put together a survey and you've identified a need, then you've kind of escalated it within the city of Richmond? I just want to know the workflow as to how, is that
Yeah,
normal or was that an exception?
no, that's a normal function of the job.
Okay.
So, and because the state of Virginia is what's called a dealing rule state. And within a dealing rule state, you have to work within the parameters of state law in order to change local law. So if it isn't written into local law already, is I can't, no one can unilaterally say, hey, you have to do this. So any urban planner working in the state of Virginia would have to be able to write a legislation or at least understand legislation in order to advocate for it to be written.
What kind of experience is needed to manage these projects?
Yeah. So experience wise, experience with budgeting is going to be super important. Um, there's a lot of things I would love to do, but just don't have the money. And the city doesn't work off of profit. I don't have to say I can only spend $100,000 because I'll go 90 to $10,000 into the hole for something, right? So it's not based off of profit. So there's a little bit more leeway with projects, but you still have a budget.
You've kind of alluded to this in terms of the money and the budgeting. Uh, w- uh, Are you guys normally seeking grants to operate, or is there a given budget year round that, okay, next year I know this is how much I'll have, the following year this is how much I'm gonna have. I'm gonna coordinate my projects according to that. Or hey, every year is a curveball depending on how many grants I've applied for and they've been approved.
So it's both. You do have a budget every fiscal year that you have to adhere by. But in my opinion, and for our office, you want to spend as much grant money as possible. So we're constantly applying for grants. I spend local taxpayer money when the state is will give you money. The federal government will give you money. Sometimes nonprofits will give you money. So we want to leverage our city funds as much as possible to make the greatest impact.
We've reached the kind of the end of the interview, and I have two questions, one of them being optional. And that is, how much is a typical pay or pay range for this job?
For this job, it's a mid 80s. It can get up a little bit more if you're in a bigger city like a DC, New York, Philadelphia. It'd be much lower if you're in a smaller city like I don't know, Roanoke or Charlottesville, something of that nature. But I'd say 80s.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks for the context too. And lastly, what advice would you give to anyone who's interested in pursuing your career?
I would say do it because you have passion for it. This is definitely not something you want to get into just to make a bunch of money or anything like that. There's a long grind at the beginning of this career where you don't make a lot of money. It's a little bit harder to find a job, but the satisfaction you get from being able to help a lot of people that over a broad swath of the population is really worthwhile.
Yeah, that's a great. I feel like the culture of work nowadays have been people Googling how much does this specific thing make, and then they'll pursue an entire career based on that answer, not necessarily the what you've described today, what motivates you and what keeps you going. So,
Right.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Brendan. And for everyone watching this episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.